There is a being in existence whose entire job description from the moment he was created has been to fight. Not a soldier who signed up, not a general who's worked his way up the ranks. A being whose very name is a battle cry, whose entire existence is oriented around one mission: stand between God's people and whatever is coming for them. He has appeared on a mountaintop in Italy and left a handprint burned into stone. He showed up over a plague-ridden Rome and sheathed the sword as a signal that the dying was over. And a pope, after reportedly witnessing a vision so disturbing it shook him to his core, wrote a prayer to this being that is still recited by hundreds of millions of people every single day. His name means, "Who is like God?" And the answer that his entire existence is the proof of, is nobody. Nothing, not even close. Today we're talking about Archangel Michael, and I want to be upfront with you right now. This is not a Sunday school lesson. This is the actual story, the full story, the one with cosmic war, the mysterious handprint in a cave, the Pope who had a vision that reportedly made him physically ill, and a battle that has been running continuously since before the first human being drew their first breath. Strap in, let's go. All right, first thing you need to understand, Michael is not technically a name, not in the original sense. In Hebrew, Michael is a question. 3 words collapsed into one. My, who, ka, like, el, God. Who is like God? That's a rhetorical question, the kind that has only one answer, and the answer is silence. Because nothing is like God. Nothing compares. Nothing comes close. Now here's why that matters. According to tradition, when Lucifer, the most beautiful, most powerful angel ever created, decided he was done being second, when he looked at his own magnificence and thought, "I'll be like the Most High," the being who stepped forward to answer that claim was Michael.
I'm your huckleberry.
And his answer wasn't a speech. It wasn't a theological argument. It wasn't a debate. His answer was his name. Who is like God? That's the battle cry. That's what he shouted, or whatever the angelic equivalent of shouting is, as he led the armies of heaven against Lucifer and a third of the angels who had decided to follow him. And Revelation 12 describes what happened next in terms that are, frankly, not subtle. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. Not strong enough against Michael, the most powerful created being in existence, the one so magnificent that his pride convinced him he deserved to be worshipped, was not strong enough against Michael. So right out of the gate, before we get into any of the apparitions, or the miracles, or the prayers, or any of it, understand what we're dealing with here. This is not a decorative figure on top of a church. This is the being who went toe to toe with the worst thing that ever existed, and he won. Now I want to slow down here, because most people hear war in heaven and they picture something vague and symbolic. A metaphor, a theological concept dressed up in dramatic language. But the early church didn't read it that way, and neither did the Jewish tradition that preceded it. They read it as an event, a real, actual, cataclysmic event that happened before the creation of the world as we know it. And the details, when you pull them together from scripture and from the ancient texts that informed early Christian theology, are staggering. Let's start with what we know from scripture. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 to 15. This is one of the oldest descriptions of what happened to Lucifer. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost highest of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. 5 I will statements, 5 declarations of self-elevation. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, deliberate rebellion. Lucifer looked at what God had and decided he wanted it for himself. And then Ezekiel chapter 28 verses 12 to 17 fills in the picture even further. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adored you. You were anointed as a guardian of the cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. This is who Michael went up against. Not a minor figure, not a mid-level angel who got too big for his wings. The seal of perfection, the guardian cherub, the most magnificent created being in existence. And here's where it gets even more extraordinary. The Book of Enoch, one of the ancient Jewish texts that deeply influenced early Christian theology, describes the angelic hierarchy in detail. It lists Michael as one of 7 archangels who stand before the throne of God. But it also describes the moment of rebellion in terms that make the stakes viscerally clear. A third of the angels follow Lucifer, not a handful, not a fringe group, a third of the entire heavenly host. Beings of immense power and intelligence looked at what Lucifer was offering and said, yeah, think about what that means militarily. Michael didn't just face one enemy. He faced a third of heaven, an army of fallen angels led by the most powerful being ever created. All of them committed to the same goal, overthrowing God. And Michael won. Not because he was stronger than Lucifer on his own. The tradition is clear on this. Michael's power comes entirely from God. His name is the answer. Who is like God? Because the answer is the source of his strength. He doesn't fight in his own power. He fights as the instrument of the one whose power has no ceiling. And that distinction matters because it means that when Michael stands between you and whatever is coming for you,
has to go through me first.
He isn't bringing his own strength to the fight. No, he's bringing God's. Now here's where the story gets even deeper, because the war didn't end when Lucifer was cast out of heaven. It continued, and it has a name. Most people know the story of Michael and Satan, the cosmic battle, the casting out, Revelation 12, but there is a thread in Jewish tradition, ancient, detailed, and largely unknown outside of serious theological study, that describes an ongoing conflict between Michael and a figure called Samael. And this thread changes the way you understand everything that comes after. Samael is one of the names given in rabbinic tradition to the chief of the fallen angels, the accuser, the adversary. In some traditions, he is identified with Satan directly. In others, he's described as Satan's chief lieutenant, the prosecuting angel, the one whose job is to bring accusations against humanity before the throne of God. And his relationship with Michael is not just adversarial. It is ancient, personal, and unrelenting. Here is what the rabbinic tradition records. When Samael fell, when he was cast out of heaven, he didn't go quietly. According to the tradition, as he fell, he reached out and tried to drag Michael down with him. Let that land for a second. The most powerful fallen being in existence, in the moment of his own destruction, made one final attempt to take the defender of God's people with him. Not out of strategy, out of spite, out of the same pride that caused the fall in the first place. And God had to intervene directly to prevent it. That is the nature of what Michael is dealing with. An enemy who, even in defeat, even in the moment of his own ruin, is still reaching for the one standing in his way. But it doesn't stop there. The rabbinic tradition describes Michael as Israel's advocate before the throne of God. His role isn't just militarily, it's legal. In the heavenly court, when Samael brings accusations against God's people, and the tradition is clear that this is an ongoing, continuous process, Michael is the one who stands up and argues for them.
You liar!
This is exactly what we see in the book of Job, by the way. The scene where Satan appears before God and asks permission to test Job. That's not a one-time event in the tradition. That's a description of a process that happens continuously. The accuser brings the charges. The defender argues against them. And in the Epistle of Jude, one of the most overlooked books in the New Testament, we get a direct glimpse of this dynamic. Jude chapter 1, verse 9. But even the Archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not himself dare to condemn him for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." The body of Moses. Think about what's happening in this passage. Moses has died, and Satan, Samael, shows up to claim the body, to use it, to corrupt it, to turn the burial place of the greatest prophet in Jewish history into something that could be used for idolatry. And Michael is there, standing in the gap, not with his own authority, but with God's. The Lord rebuke you. Not I rebuke you, the Lord rebuke you. Even in direct confrontation with the enemy, Michael's posture is the same as his name. He doesn't claim authority for himself. He points to the one whose authority is absolute. This is the pattern. This is who he is. And it runs through every single story we are about to tell. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because Michael isn't just a warrior. That's his most famous role, but Catholic tradition gives him 4 distinct offices, 4 jobs, and when you add them up, you start to understand why the church considers him the most important angelic figure in existence. Job 1, commander of the army of God. This is the one everybody knows, leader of the heavenly hosts, the being who cast Satan out of heaven, the one depicted in basically every piece of religious art ever made, standing on a dragon with a sword or a spear. In the book of Daniel, written in the 2nd century BC, centuries before Christianity, Michael shows up as the great prince who protects your people. He's described as being engaged in a literal battle with the Prince of Persia, which scholars interpret as a demonic power, while simultaneously holding the line for Israel. And here's the detail in Daniel chapter 10 that most people miss. The angel speaking to Daniel tells him that he had been trying to reach him for 21 days. 21 days. But the Prince of Persia, this demonic territorial power, had been blocking him. And it was Michael who came and broke through so the message could be delivered. This is not a metaphor. Daniel is describing a real conflict happening in a dimension we can't see, with Michael as the commanding officer on the right side, a conflict where the outcome of spiritual battles directly affects what happens in the physical world. Job 2, angel of death. And I don't mean that in a horror movie way, I mean it in the most comforting way possible. Catholic tradition holds that Michael is present at the moment of death, specifically to escort the souls of the faithful to heaven. He's the one who shows up at the end and makes sure you get where you're supposed to go. There's a reason the prayer to Saint Michael asks him to defend us in battle. Because the tradition is that at the moment of death, the enemy makes one final attempt to claim a soul. And Michael is the one standing there making sure that doesn't happen. The Coptic Orthodox tradition, one of the oldest Christian traditions in existence, celebrates Michael on the 12th of every single month. Every month, because his role as escort and protector of souls is considered so central, so ongoing, that it warrants monthly commemoration. Job 3, weigher of souls. This is why you see Michael in art holding a set of scales. At the Last Judgment, tradition holds that Michael participates in the weighing of souls, the final accounting of a life. He's not just the warrior, he's also the one holding the scales of divine justice, mercy, and judgment, held in the same hands. And there is something profound in that image. The same being who fights for you in life is the one holding the scales at the end of it. He is not your enemy at judgment. He is your advocate. The same Michael who stood between you and the darkness while you were alive is the one making sure the accounting is just when you're gone. Job 4, guardian of the church. After serving as the guardian of Israel in the Old Testament, the being specifically assigned to protect God's chosen people, Michael transitions in the New Testament to the role of guardian of the church, the new Israel, the new people of God, which means that every attack on the church, every heresy, every persecution, every attempt to destroy what Christ built has Michael standing in the gap. 4 jobs: warrior, escort, judge, and guardian. And he's been doing all 4 simultaneously without a day off since before the world was created. And here's why that matters to you specifically, not in the theological abstract way, but in the right now, this week, whatever you're currently carrying kind of way. If you have ever felt like something was working against you in a direction you couldn't see or name, like the resistance you're facing is bigger than the circumstances explain, what you're about to hear is not background information. It's a framework for what's actually happening. Now, before we get into the physical apparitions, the cave, the plague, the skull, I want to go further back because Michael's interventions in human history didn't start in 490 AD. They started at the very beginning of the biblical record. And these stories are almost entirely unknown outside of serious Jewish and Catholic scholarship. Abraham and the furnace. You know Abraham, father of the faith, the man God called out of Ur to become the father of a nation. But there is a story that precedes the one most people know. A story from the Midrashic tradition that describes one of Michael's earliest recorded interventions on behalf of a human being. Before Abraham became the patriarch, before the covenant, before Isaac, there was a king named Nimrod. Nimrod was the most powerful ruler of his age, builder of cities, founder of empires, and according to the tradition, when the young Abraham began proclaiming the existence of one God,
there is only one God.
Rejecting the idols, rejecting the pantheon, rejecting everything Nimrod's power was built on, Nimrod had him thrown into a furnace. Not a metaphorical furnace, a literal furnace. The kind used to execute people who threatened the established order. And according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Jacob, recorded in the Midrash Genesis Rabbah, it was Michael who pulled Abraham out. Think about the weight of that moment. The entire trajectory of salvation history, the covenant, the nation of Israel, the line of David, the incarnation itself, runs through Abraham. And in the moment when the entire trajectory could have been extinguished in a furnace in ancient Mesopotamia, Michael was there. Not because Abraham was already great. He wasn't yet. He was just a man who had decided to tell the truth about God in a world that didn't want to hear it. And Michael showed up. This is the pattern. This is who he is. He doesn't wait for you to be worthy. He shows up when you're in the furnace. The tradition continues with Jacob, Abraham's grandson, the one who would become Israel. Before Jacob was born, according to rabbinic tradition, Samael, the accuser, the adversary, attempted to destroy him while he was still in his mother's womb. Still in the womb. The enemy's strategy has never been subtle. Destroy the line, cut off the covenant, eliminate the people before they can become a people. And Michael intervened, protecting Jacob before he had drawn a single breath, before he had done anything, before he had a name. This is the scope of what we're talking about. Michael's protection of God's people isn't reactive. It isn't waiting for the attack to land and then responding. It is active, anticipatory, and it operates on a timeline that makes human strategy look like it's moving in slow motion. And then there's the story that most people know from the book of Daniel, but don't know Michael's role in it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 young Jewish men thrown into a furnace by Nebuchadnezzar for refusing to worship a golden idol. The furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal, hot enough to kill the soldiers who threw them in. And then Nebuchadnezzar looks into the furnace and sees not 3 figures, but 4. And the 4th, he says, looks like a son of the gods. The tradition, recorded in the Midrash Genesis Rabbah, identifies that 4th figure as Michael. Same pattern. Furnace, impossible odds, the people of God facing destruction for refusing to compromise their faith, and Michael standing in the fire with them,
I'm not going anywhere.
Not pulling them out immediately, standing in the fire with them first. There is something in that detail that I think is worth sitting with. He doesn't always remove the trial. Sometimes he enters it with you. All right, now we get to the part that I personally find the most compelling, because it's one thing to read about Michael in scripture and ancient tradition. It's another thing entirely when he starts showing up in recorded history and leaving physical evidence. Mount Gargano, Italy, 490 AD. A local bishop in the Gargano region of southern Italy starts receiving reports of a strange event near a cave on the mountain. A bull wanders off, gets found near the cave entrance, and when someone tries to shoot it with an arrow, the arrow turns around and hits the archer instead. The bishop investigates. According to the account, Michael appears and declares the cave a sacred place, his sanctuary, and says that sins confessed there will be forgiven. The bishop, understandably skeptical, waits. 3 years later, a battle is about to be lost. The bishop prays at the cave. The enemy is routed. The victory is attributed to Michael's intervention. The cave becomes the sanctuary of Mount Sant'Angelo. It is still there. It is one of the oldest continuously operating Christian pilgrimage sites in the world. Popes have visited it. Saints have made pilgrimages to it. And inside the cave, burned into the stone, is what tradition identifies as the handprint of Michael himself. Not painted, not carved, burned in. Rome, 590 AD. The city is being destroyed by a plague. Bodies in the streets. The population collapsing. Pope Gregory the Great, one of the most significant popes in church history, leads a procession through the city, praying for the plague to end. As the procession reaches the Mausoleum of Hadrian, a massive circular tomb on the banks of the Tiber, Gregory looks up, and he sees Michael standing on top of the mausoleum, sheathing his sword. The plague ends. Gregory renames the building the Castle of the Holy Angel. That name has stuck for 1400 years. The building still stands. There is a massive bronze statue of Michael on top of it, sword being sheathed, commemorating exactly what Gregory saw. Normandy, France, 708 AD. Michael appears to Saint Aubert, the bishop of Avranches, in a dream. He tells him to build a church on a rocky tidal island off the coast of Normandy. Aubert hesitates. Michael appears again. Aubert hesitates again. The third time, according to the account, Michael presses his finger into Aubert's skull hard enough to leave a mark, a physical indentation, as if to say, I am not asking, I am telling. Aubert builds the church. That island is now Mount Saint Michael, one of the most recognizable structures in the world. A medieval fortress abbey rising out of the sea, accessible only at low tide, that has been a pilgrimage site for over 1300 years. And the skull of Saint Aubert with the indentation is still preserved and venerated in a church in the Avranches. 3 apparitions, 3 sites that still exist. 3 moments where Michael showed up, did something undeniable, and left physical evidence behind. But none of that is the part that stopped me cold. Because in 1884, something happened inside a private chapel in Rome that didn't just leave a mark on a building. It changed what every Catholic on earth prays at every single Mass. And most people have been saying that prayer their entire lives without ever knowing what caused it. That's next. Now here's the one that I think deserves its own section, because this is a story that most people have never heard, myself included, and it changes the way you understand the prayer. 1884, Pope Leo XIII. Leo has just finished celebrating Mass in his private chapel. He's an old man at this point, in his 70s, one of the longest serving popes in history, a man who has seen a lot. He stops at the altar after Mass and goes completely still. The people in the chapel watch him stand there, motionless, for somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. His face goes white. When he finally moves, he goes directly into his office. What comes out of that office within hours is the prayer to Saint Michael. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Leo orders it to be prayed at the end of every Mass throughout the entire Catholic Church. Every Mass, every day, everywhere. Now, what did he see? I want to be honest with you. When I first went down this rabbit hole, I had said the prayer to Saint Michael probably hundreds of times. I grew up with it. It was just something you said. But when I actually found out what Leo saw that day, what made this man who had watched empires rise and fall walk out of that chapel shaking, it completely changed the way I pray that prayer. It stopped being a regular prayer and it started being a weapon. The accounts that have been passed down, and these come from people who were present and spoke to Leo directly afterwards, describe a vision. A conversation between God and Satan, in which Satan is given a period of time and increased power to attempt to destroy the church. Leo reportedly heard Satan claim that if he had enough time and enough influence, he could destroy the church.
Yeah, that's a bold statement.
And God, in the vision, granted him the time. And Leo, this old man who spent his entire life in the church, who had seen empires rise and fall, who was not given to dramatics, walked out of that chapel shaking. And his response was not despair. His response was the prayer. Because if Satan has been given a window of increased power and influence, then the answer is to invoke the one being who has already beaten him, the one whose name is the answer to every claim of power that Satan has ever made. Who is like God? Nobody. And Michael is the proof. Now here's what I want you to understand about that prayer. It is not a passive request. It is not a polite ask. It is a deployment order. When Leo wrote, "Thrust into hell, Satan, and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls," he wasn't writing poetry. He wasn't writing a love letter. He was writing a directive. He was invoking the authority of the one being in existence who has already demonstrated the most definitive way possible that Satan's power has a ceiling. And that ceiling is Michael. Here's the thing about Michael that I think gets lost in the statues and the stained glass and the feast day liturgies. He is not a historical figure. He is not a symbol. He is not a metaphor for the triumph of good over evil in some abstract, comfortable sense. He is an active, present, engaged being whose entire existence is oriented around one mission: protecting the people of God from the thing that wants to destroy them. And the thing that wants to destroy them has not retired. We live in a world that has largely decided that spiritual warfare is not real. That the idea of an actual enemy, an actual malevolent intelligence working against human flourishing, against families, against faith, against the things that make life worth living, is a preconceived scientific superstition that educated people have moved past. And I would just point out, that is exactly what you would want people to believe if you were the enemy. That the most effective military strategy in history is to convince your opponent that you don't exist. Michael's entire existence is the counter-argument. He is the being who looked at the most powerful created intelligence in existence, the one who decided he deserved to be worshipped, and said out loud in the form of his own name, "Who is like God?" and then proved it. Go back through everything we've covered today. He protected Jacob before Jacob was born, and he pulled Abraham out of a furnace at the very beginning of salvation history. He broke through 21 days of demonic resistance to deliver a message to Daniel. He stood over Rome and ended a plague. He pressed his finger into a bishop's skull to make sure a church got built. He stood between Moses' body and the enemy who wanted to corrupt it. And he is standing right now in the gap, 10 toes down, between you and whatever is coming. The church gives him 4 titles that I think are worth sitting with. Prince of Heavenly Hosts, he commands. Angel of Death, he escorts. Weigher of Souls, he judges. Guardian of the Church, he protects. And the prayer that a shaken pope wrote after a vision that turned his face white is still being prayed every day by hundreds of millions of people, because Leo the 13th understood something that we are still catching up to. The battle is real. The enemy is real. And the warrior God assigned to stand in the gap is real. Who is like God? Nobody. And if you need a reminder of that, If you are in the middle of something that feels like it's coming from a direction you can't see and can't fight, you now know who to call. So here's where we land. Michael appears in the oldest Jewish text as the chief of the angels. He shows up in Daniel as the prince who protects God's people. He appears in Revelation leading the army that cast Satan out of heaven. He pulled Abraham from a furnace before salvation history had even properly begun. He stood in the fire with 3 young men who refused to bow. He broke through demonic resistance for 21 days to deliver a message. He burns his handprint into a cave in Italy. He sheathes a sword over Rome and ends a plague. He leaves a dent in the bishop's skull in France and gets a fortress abbey built in the ocean. A pope has a vision that shakes him to his core and writes a prayer that gets recited at every mass on earth for decades. And his name, his actual name, the name he has carried since before the world existed, is a question that doubles as a declaration. Who is like God? The answer is the whole point. Nobody. Nothing. Not the most powerful angel ever created, not the most powerful empire ever built, not the most sophisticated evil ever organized. Nobody is like God. And Michael has been proving that one battle at a time since before any of us were here. If this video hits you somewhere real, share it. Send it to someone who's in a fight they can't see. Someone who needs to know that the warrior assigned to stand between them and the darkness has been on the job since before the world began and has never lost. And if you want more stories like this, the real ones, the ones that make you sit back and go, okay, something is actually going on here, please subscribe. Because we are just getting started. Saint Michael the Archangel, patron of soldiers, patron of police, patron of the dying, patron of the church. And the only being in existence whose name is simultaneously a question, a battle cry, and the answer to every claim of power that darkness has ever made. Thank you for watching.